Antiquities Trafficking is the subject this week on Chattin' with Janine. I'm your host, State Representative Janine Nodder. My guest this week is Rick St. Hilaire. Welcome, Rick.
Good to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
We're longtime Facebook friends, and we see each other in different circles around the state. I know you're an attorney, but we're talking about antiquities trafficking.
That's exactly right. And so part of my legal practice, I've been practicing for about 30 years now, but it's cultural heritage law. And it's really a focus on the looting, the smuggling, and the sale of illicit antiquities. So think of things like archaeological objects or ethnological objects or even dinosaur fossils. Those
People
kinds of
steal
items.
Dinosaurs? How do you steal a dinosaur?
So a lot of dinosaur fossils, and they've become very popular now in the trafficking. So one case that has come up very recently are these traffickers taking dinosaur fossils from Mongolia. Mongolia is a very rich source of very unique dinosaur fossils. And as we can see on this screen, we have this, what's called a batar, a Tyrannosaurus batar, which is a dinosaur that's a little bit smaller than a T-Rex. And this is one of the items that was seized by Homeland Security investigations not too long ago. And this was trafficked from the Gobi Desert in Mongolia, and it made its appearance here in the United States on the market. And this dinosaur fossil, along with others, they were recovered and they were recently repatriated to Mongolia, and a trafficking network was taken down that involved people in Florida, Wyoming, Arizona, New York, and then overseas.
Who tried to buy the dinosaur head?
So in this particular case, it first went to a man in Florida who was essentially assembling dinosaur fossils to complete a total replica of a dinosaur, but with real fossils.
With different parts, like
Yep.
a T-Rex leg and a head from whatever it was you've said. And
He was actually trying to find the right parts that go to this particular dinosaur itself.
and what's he going to do with it?
He's going to sell it.
Oh.
And that's because the market now for dinosaur fossils has increased a lot, at least in my experience too. Over the last, I'd say 7 years, I've seen a boom in this kind of trafficking. Because in the past, where collectors might have wanted a Greek vase or a bust of a Roman emperor or something like that, everybody had that. So people wanted something different. So they were starting to buy dinosaur fossils. And that's why the market has really expanded. And the value of these dinosaur fossils has increased exponentially. So there's a real driver now for commercial paleontologists, as they call themselves, to gather these fossils, put them together, and put them for sale. And this particular head that we saw earlier, it was bought by a physician out west. And he didn't know that it was looted, but
And what was he
now
going to do with it? I'm just
collect it.
just collect it. Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Do you have any collections that are interesting?
I don't collect at all because I'm in the business of fighting the looting and trafficking of artifacts. So I actually stay away from any kind of collecting. It's not to say that collecting is bad, but there are good ways to collect and bad ways to collect. And the first way that collectors should collect is due diligence, asking questions. Where did something come from? So especially now with Facebook and eBay and even in WhatsApp, the sale of artifacts, ancient coins, ancient lamps, or even the more expensive pieces has just increased quite a bit. But people aren't asking questions. Buyers aren't asking questions. And part of what I'm trying to get across to collectors is ask, where's the piece from? How did it get to the United States? Do you have any kind of import paperwork? You know, things of that nature. And check out the background of a dealer, too.
If someone just does an internet search for, like, buy dinosaur bone, does an alert go off?
No, an alert won't go off, but you definitely will be able to find some suppliers out there. You know, especially now, if you go to Facebook Marketplace, that has been a growing place of buying artifacts, whether it's paleontological material, dinosaur fossils, or archaeological material, and that's what I'm most focused on. You can buy almost anything now. And interestingly, before coming on this show just a few days ago, Egypt just took down a network in their own country that was offering items, something like 1,000 to 2,000 items for sale on Facebook. And they were quite visible for sale on Facebook. And they found a person who actually was dealing with these looted objects.
Oh, wow. You brought some photos with you today. Maybe we should go through them now. We saw one. We saw the head. What are we looking at?
So here is a picture from 2015 of a very famous archaeological site called Dura Europos in Syria. Very important site near the Euphrates River, and it was occupied by several different civilizations, but it really expanded during the Roman era. Now, during the time of ISIS, when ISIS was taking over territory in the Middle East, Near East, archaeological site looting just exploded. And this is a photo that's a classic photo that shows us all of these dots at this archaeological site. And each of those dots is a looter's pit. That's the kind of ravaging that occurs at archaeological sites when you do have this kind of looting. And in the case of ISIS, ISIS actually had a Department of Antiquities set up so that it was issuing permits to go and loot sites. And when items were recovered by the looters, the items were being taxed by ISIS. So that told us that ISIS was using archaeological site looting to be able to fuel its weapons trafficking and its violence and mayhem. So that's why antiquities trafficking is important. Here's another picture too that shows us the damage caused by archaeological site looting. So there was this figure, this bust called a Kokare bust that was being offered for sale, and the picture in the bottom right shows us what appeared on the front page of an auction catalog in New York. And so the piece was in New York offered for sale, but its feet were in Cambodia, which highly showed that it was a looted artifact.
I see two little stands with feet.
Yeah, and so this statue was among a group of statues, and that entire site area was looted. And long story short, this piece was actually recovered from the auction house by authorities, and it's been since repatriated to Cambodia. Cambodia has actually recovered the other pieces near this particular site and put them in its own special museum to be able to tell the public not just about the culture of this site, but also about the looting problem.
And how old is this object?
That I don't know. I'm not a specialist in Cambodian items at all. But I can tell you that for Cambodia itself, the trafficking of antiquities is a big problem.
Is Cambodia where they have the big jars, the big giant jars?
Some of the,
or is that Laos?
Well, Laos and Cambodia obviously share a lot of the same types of cultural objects that are out there.
That separates the two?
Yeah, so basically in Southeast Asia, there are so many things that even look similar. I mean, that's why the important thing, especially for me in my work, is consulting specialists. So because I don't know much about Cambodian objects, I go to a specialist, and I have a particular specialist I count on to be able to go over objects like this or any other from Southeast Asia. And this picture shows the famous
King Tut.
Actually, it's not. It's Nejamak.
Ah.
Nejamak was a priest who was buried in this gilded golden coffin. And this is a famous object because it appeared at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And the Metropolitan Museum of Art featured it as its signature object for a special showing. The museum paid about $4 million for this particular object, but it was looted in 2011 from Egypt. And so the museum had to turn it over to authorities, and it's since been returned.
So they lost the $4 million?
They did, because insurance doesn't cover stolen pieces. And what's significant about this object, too, not only is it absolutely beautiful and spectacular, but it uncovered a trafficking ring starting in Egypt, and this item went through a dealer in Paris before it made its way to New York. But it had false paperwork. And false paperwork is really common with antiquities. So there was a whole made-up history about this piece, that it had been uncovered sometime in the 1970s, and it had passed hands to various collectors. It was all a lie. The real truth was it was really uncovered in 2011 by a looter and essentially put in through a trafficking network, and even the Metropolitan Museum of Art. ended up buying that.
Wow.
Exactly.
I see a helmet, and what is the deer object?
That is what's called a Righton. Think of it as a drinking cup.
Okay, I was going to guess that.
Yeah, you'll see
Like
a lot
a
of
Viking.
those.
Do Vikings drink out of that cup?
I don't know if they do, but I know in particular this is something that was repatriated to Turkey. So it's part of that particular culture. If you want to see a really good cup too, there's a Hittite Righton down at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. So the Hittite civilization, it's just spectacular. But these pieces too, these were found at the Met in New York and were in the possession of a famous collector, big collector, Michael Steinhardt, the big hedge fund billionaire who had been collecting antiquities for many, many years. And I'd say the Righton, that's probably valued at around $3 million or so. The helmet is probably in the six figures for pieces, but it was all part of a collection, a $70 million collection that was just filled with close to 200 stolen artifacts.
How did they find out these were stolen?
In this particular case, the Antiquities Trafficking Unit in Manhattan, which is a specialized prosecutor's office headed up by Army Colonel Matthew Bogdanos, who basically is a prosecuting attorney in New York. He set up this small unit to try to uncover the trafficking networks because New York is one of the biggest art markets anywhere. And so in this particular case, an investigation was out there, and it revealed all of these pieces that had been looted and trafficked into New York, and they've since been returned.
Wow, and okay, this is not King Tut?
No, it's not. So this is a story. It's an interesting story. It's one of the few federal cases. It's called U.S. versus Frederick Schultz. And many years ago, there was a looter and trafficker named Jonathan Tockley Perry from the UK. And he was in Egypt working with people at construction sites. And whenever you do construction in Egypt, you're bound to find something.
Yeah.
You are.
Well,
so what
cool.
do you do? What do you do with these artifacts?
What did he do?
So the contractor at the site contacted Jonathan Tockley Perry. He purchased this piece on the left, and this is the bust of Amenhotep III.
I'm sorry.
So from the contractor who was working the construction
so the contractor
site.
found it and sold it.
That's
and it
right.
didn't belong to him. Okay,
Exactly.
And he sold it to...
Jonathan Tockley Perry.
And you said the name you were about...
So this head is Amenhotep III.
Amenhotep. Is that Tut's father?
Amenhotep III was the father of the heretic king Akhenaten, and so is the grandfather of Tutankhamun. So basically the grandfather of King Tut.
I've heard the name before, so...
So
Can
this,
you see the resemblance?
You bet. And this is a unique piece because Amenhotep III's features are very distinct in the late period of his reign, so this bust is a good picture of him. But how does Tockley Perry get it out of the country to sell it? Well, what did he do?
Broke his nose.
Nope, he disguised it. He
how did
wrapped
he
it
do
up, and you can see the picture on the right. He wrapped it up with gold foil, painted it all up so it looks like a cheap tourist object that you would buy at a gift shop somewhere.
Oh, wow.
Yep. So that's how he smuggled it out of Egypt, brought it into the United Kingdom, and then he created a fake collection history.
What's it made out of? It looks heavy.
On the left, you'll see that it's stone, and it is. It's solid stone. But on the right, it looks like just some kind of cheap artifact.
Wouldn't a cheap tourist, what do you call them, the souvenir, not weigh so much?
That's exactly right. And so, the chance, of course, is if you're going through customs and they look through your bag, if they pick it up, they'll figure out that it's way too heavy. But if they don't, if they're just kind of looking at it, it doesn't look like it's a heavy stone object at all. And Tockley Perry went a step further. He actually went to a gift shop. He bought some item at the gift shop, threw out the item, kept the receipt, so that the receipt could go with this piece that he disguised to get out of the country.
Oh my goodness, what a scoundrel.
Yeah, so that's what smuggling does. You're always trying to cover up the kinds of crimes that are out there. And this is a classic example of it. This piece eventually moved into the United States. It was purchased for 7 figures, ended up in the hands of a famous art dealer, Frederick Schultz, who was one of the few people that was ever prosecuted for antiquities trafficking in the United States. He actually did prison time for
I didn't even know it was a thing.
Exactly.
I'm learning. What do you have with you? Is that a fossil?
Sure. So I brought this in. This is a replica of a tablet with cuneiform writing. So let me explain that these cuneiform tablets, they're clay tablets with wedge-shaped writing. And they traditionally come from the Near East. So think of places like Syria, Iraq. And they're highly valued by collectors because they're relatively inexpensive and there are a lot of them. So they're very much trafficked items that are out there. And the cuneiform writing, the script, it's just like our alphabet can be used for English, Spanish, Italian, that kind of thing. So cuneiform writing, too, is a particular script that you would find with many ancient languages from the ancient Near East.
I remember learning about that in social studies when I was a kid. So I was holding it up. Am I holding it the right way? I mean, I can't read it.
Yeah.
So it's
cuneiform, I don't know. That's why I go to experts.
I held it up like this, but maybe you read it this way. I don't know, left to right, right to left.
But it's a good example of the kinds of artifacts that are very much available over the internet that people just pay a few dollars for, but it fuels the Antiquities Trafficking network. We saw some high-value objects just moments ago. These are some of the items that you would find as low-value objects in terms of their dollar value. But I can't stress enough, and this is the importance of it, this is like evidence from a crime scene. So I'm a former prosecutor, and if somebody ever disturbed one of my crime scenes in the past, well, that itself is a crime, because the moment that you move objects, information is taken away about whatever crime happened. For the archaeologist, when a looter removes this kind of information, especially something that has writing on it, from beneath the ground.
Well, how do you know it's writing? I mean, if you didn't know it was writing, you wouldn't know it was writing.
Exactly.
Does that make sense?
That's why there are specialists out there too, but this is very common in the ancient Near East. So everybody, for instance, recognizes hieroglyphs as being part of the Egyptian language. Whenever you see this kind of wedge shape writing, you know that that's from the ancient Near East. Could be from Mesopotamia, the Akkadians, the Assyrians, so that's what's really important for people to know if they're trying to make purchases of these items. But it's taking away information. And once that information is gone, it's lost forever because it's not documented at all. It's just like tearing a page from a person's diary. You've lost that information. You can't just put the page back. You can't just put this back in the ground and give the archaeologist the information that the archaeologist needs to be able to figure out the history of a particular area, or especially a date.
So in our little state of New Hampshire, have you ever come across any antiquity looters?
Yes,
trackers?
as a matter of fact, over the years, so I've done consulting here and there, but I've been practicing in this area of law for about 20 years. And so we've had many issues here in New Hampshire. So one example, we had human remains of a Civil War soldier that were once offered for auction for sale here in New Hampshire.
Oh, how awful.
It was.
It was morbid.
It was terrible. But I'm glad we found that, and I'm glad it surfaced on the market because it revealed, for instance, that we didn't have a law in New Hampshire that barred the sale of human remains. So, as a matter of fact, the legislature took care of that many years ago, so now we have a new law. And there was a good end to the story, too. We were able to discover that this particular soldier from the Civil War should have been buried at a particular military cemetery down south. And
he was a Confederate.
No, it was Union, if I remember correctly. It was a Union soldier. And I can't remember the specifics because it's been a while now, but I do remember that we were able to find out that this particular soldier was identified in a particular battle in a particular area, and there was a particular cemetery that the bones came from to begin with.
So they dug him up? Oh,
Yep.
It just gets worse.
So
well, I hope the person is being prosecuted or was prosecuted for that.
Well, it's unknown who did the looting in that particular situation. But other issues that we have in New Hampshire too, we have illegal treasure hunting that goes on in ghost towns and remote sites here in New Hampshire.
Oh, there's gold buried at Budweiser. That was just a show I just taped recently.
Oh, is that right?
About that, yes.
So, the metal detector is the primary item, the primary tool for looters. Now, granted, not all looters or not all people who use metal detectors are looters. There's a lot of legitimate and good ways of using a metal detector. But for looters who are looking for valuable metal objects, whether it's coins or commemoratives or something like that, New Hampshire is a rich place for those kinds of things. But people need to remember that if you go onto a public beach or a public park or something like that, you have to report any of those finds to the authorities. People can't keep those items themselves. There are laws that protect that cultural heritage.
Then why go looking for them?
Because you could take it and you could sell it. And
But it's illegal.
And who's going to know?
You.
Well,
That's your job.
Yeah, well, I can only do so much because the real issue for antiquities trafficking, looting, whether it's here in New Hampshire, in the U.S., or abroad, how many people are out there to investigate these cases? How many people are out there to watch and enforce? And then my concern mostly is with prosecutors, because prosecutors, as a rule, don't prosecute these cases.
But how many people with a metal detector know that it's illegal to keep their findings, that they're supposed to report them?
I would say many do.
So is ignorance save them, or no?
All I can tell you is that items appear on the market that aren't supposed to appear on the market, and you know that those items are detected through metal detectors.
Wow. So we have time is going by really fast. What is this book?
So I wrote a book chapter recently that appears in this book that was published, and it talks about the focus now on antiquities trafficking and the financing of terror and organized crime financing. Because not a lot has been written in this area right now, and it's really important to bring awareness, because I'd say in the last several years, maybe since about 2014 or so, there's been far more awareness among policymakers that antiquities trafficking is a national security concern. And when I served on the Cultural Property Advisory Committee a few years ago for 3 years, and that's a committee that advises, technically it's the president, but the president assigns the duties to the State Department. So this committee advises the State Department on cultural heritage protection treaties. And I would say that the State Department has a real concern now, rightly so, for national security issues related to antiquities trafficking. And as we discussed earlier, ISIS really put that on the map of showing how you can dig up artifacts, you can convert them to cash, and that cash gets converted to weapons.
Wow. Wow.
And that's what I wrote about.
Well, that's
in this
interesting.
chapter.
Do you know what chapter it is?
It's on page 186.
Ah, you know the page.
Yeah. So in this particular chapter, I was chronicling how we've started to change our attention.
Your first name is Ricardo.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So my mom's Italian, so I got the Ricardo from her.
Italian on my mom's side.
Perfect. And French-Canadian heritage on my dad's side. That's where the Saint Hiliare comes from.
I'm Scottish on the other side. But wow, here it is, Stolen Heritage. Well, that's really cool. And this book is published by Oxford.
That's right. Yep. Oxford University Press. Yep.
Well, we have about 3 minutes left. Have you seen the Triceratops at the Museum of Science? You probably have.
Oh, yes.
Yes, Sarah's her name. So my youngest is now in his 20s, but when he was in middle school and they had their field trip, I made sure that my group said, "Hey, you guys got to come see the dinosaur." I'm like, "Look, it's a real dinosaur." And I was like, "Why aren't you more excited?" And then they told us not to take them into the gift shop, but I snuck them in anyway because I found out that they had never tasted the astronaut ice cream.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Which
you have to have
taste
some.
that good. Yeah.
So just don't tell anybody. Because I can't buy for all of them.
But you bring up a great point about a museum, and I hope that the viewers may have a different perspective when going into a museum. So the next time somebody goes into a museum and sees an ancient manuscript, ancient jewelry, ancient pottery, things like that, asking the question, where is this from? Because the little signs on the bottom, most of them don't tell you where they're from. And they have lots of red flags and lots of question marks.
Well, sounds like you've got work to do for the rest of your life.
There's plenty of work to do, but it requires a lot of people to be able to pitch in and assist. And without a doubt, the more people know about this area and ask questions and are alert to what's going on, the more helpful it is to me and others who work in this particular sector to be able to combat this crime.
So always question. So I used to be a freelance writer when I was younger, and that was my editor at the time. He always told me, always ask questions. And he liked that I worked for him because I always asked a lot of questions, more than the people that were on the payroll. I was just freelance, but
that's the perfect thing. Yeah. And of course, when you get the answers, especially in this area too, when you're questioning a dealer, you can get a lot of false information. So it's a matter of following up on those questions too, and really questioning the documents as well. A lot of fakes, a lot of forgeries in the market, and a lot of fake paperwork that backs up objects too.
Gee, it's hard to know what's legit and what isn't.
It is, and that's why it's really good to get a consultant if you're ever making a kind of purchase that's out there, because there are people. So for instance, even though I don't know much about this artifact, I know immediately looking at it, this is a fake. This is a reproduction. It's not real. Because when you've seen a lot of objects, when you see a lot of objects, you start to tell the difference.
Well, they don't let you touch the things at the Museum of Science either.
No, they don't.
Fine arts.
But when you go to an auction house at the pre-sale, that's different. It's like going to a museum, but at an auction house for the pre-sale, you actually get to see the things, and sometimes you get to touch them.
Do you ever find things in antique stores that are questionable?
Oh, yes.
Because I love antique stores too, because it's like going to a museum, but you don't have to pay to get in.
That's exactly right. But the things that I focus on are things that are really old. So those things that are newer, at least from my perspective in an antique store, they don't concern me as much as the things that I do see at an antique store that are very old, that are ancient.
So if our viewers see anything out there and they have a question, and how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so basically, you just Google me.
Yeah, Facebook Messenger works for me.
Yeah, if you Google my name, you'll see me in lots of places, and there are many ways to get in touch with me. But yeah, I always encourage that. If somebody has a question, if I can't answer it, and I can't answer a lot of questions, I know people that I can make a referral to.
Awesome. Well, this was very interesting. So thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So now it's a long drive for you, and thank you for watching.